Well, so the main take home from the plant sale is that people take home native plants and plant them in their properties. And in the 11 years that we've been doing this, tens of thousands of new native plants have been planted in Rose Valley and all the surrounding communities, and hopefully they all had babies, and now there are many, many, many more native plants in our neighborhood. And native plants are the base of the food web. They are the reason why we have wildlife, and everybody should know that private properties are essential to conservation. And a good place to find out more about that is at Doug Tallamy's website, which is Homegrown National Park. And I think it's just homegrownnationalpark.org. And that'll give you excellent advice and tell you how important what you're doing is to wildlife and to the environment by planting native plants.
Hear ye, hear ye. Roger is prepared to lead a walk through the woods, and if you've never been before, it's something we always look forward to every year. Roger is very knowledgeable, and it's definitely worth doing. So, Roger, ready to go right now?
We're ready now. So I'm here to extol the virtues of native plants and to extol the dangers of non-native invasive plants. This part of the Saul Sanctuary was where we started about, what, 14 years ago, 13 years ago. We started planting natives and pulling invasives, and it has totally transformed since then. It used to be 100% cover of, essentially, of garlic mustard. Does everyone know what garlic mustard is?
I used to when I was pulling it out with you.
Yeah. Forgotten. And we now, I mean, I usually started my spiel with an introduction to garlic mustard because it's such an amazing plant. We can't even find one until we get like a quarter of a mile in now, which is very awesome. So we've been incredibly successful.
And we didn't know if we would.
We didn't have any idea if this would work. Well, I mean, I had some idea that I hope He's got
to look really hard.
He's got a terrific eye, I'll tell you, because I already walked by here and I didn't see any. This plant is first of all, native plants support the ecosystem by feeding specialist feeder insects. And the reason insects are so important is that plants are the base of the food chain, or the food web, and insects are the next level up. And everybody eats insects, spiders and turtles and birds can't even successfully raise their young without insects. Did you know that? Birds never feed their babies berries. There's not enough nutrition in a berry. An insect is full of fat and it's full of protein, and that's what they need. And there's no plant-based food. You don't have very many vegan birds. Actually, some birds are vegan as adults, but not as babies. They eat bugs. And without that whole system of plants, insects, native insects, which eat the native plants, nothing else could exist. And so what we have coming in, and have for a long time, because Philadelphia was a big port city since day one, and even before Europeans settled anywhere near here, lots of species coming in from places with similar climates, Europe and East Asia, principally. And some of them, a lot of them are just harmless. Like this one here, this is actually a native. This is called white man's foot, and yet this is a native species. There's also a white man's foot that's from Europe, and I presume that Native Americans call it white man's foot because they followed white men everywhere they went. But this is a native. We have 3,000 plant species in Pennsylvania. 2,000 of them are native. 1,000 of them are non-native. 1,000 non-native species, but not that many of them are invasive. And what it means to be invasive is that it's so different chemically and structurally from any of the natives that there are no insects or fungi or nematodes or anybody here who can eat them. So they just explode and go rampant. And garlic mustard is like the quintessential non-native invasive species. It's called garlic. If you smell it, it smells like nothing. It smells like a plant. But what happens is when an insect munches this, and not that many native insects do, but in its home territory, when an insect munches this, within each cell in the leaf, there's a vacuole and another vacuole with two different chemicals that are harmless to the plant. And when it gets munched, they mix together those chemicals and turn into something that smells to us like garlic and to insects like death. It kills them. And so nobody eats it here. There are specialist feeders back where it comes from that can eat it. So take a leaf, smell it, you'll smell nothing. Then crush it and you'll smell garlic. And it gets stronger and stronger.
Oh, yeah. We're mixing it.
Now, so the other thing that this does chemically is that it exudes something from its roots that kills off the fungi that the tree seedlings depend on in order to grow to adulthood. So this is killing our trees. It's covering the landscape. It's doing nothing good for the local ecosystem. And it's taking space away from natives. And you would think, it only lives 2 years. It's a biennial. So in the first year, it just has a little rosette of leaves. The second year, it bolts and makes flowers and fruits. And you would think that you could uproot it and go like that, and you had problem solved, right? The other amazing thing this plant does is that if I leave this here, tomorrow it will look like this. And next week, it'll start maturing seeds and scattering the seeds. Which is why there's several huge trash bags on the other side of my beat up truck here full of this stuff. What you have to do is put it in a bag and put it in the landfill, sadly. That's the only way to really get rid of it. When a plant exudes chemicals that affect other species from its roots, it's called allelopathic. And this is allelopathic against certain fungi, not directly against other plants, like black walnuts are famous for being allelopathic to other plants. This is allelopathic to fungi that other plants depend on. So a tree seedling doesn't have much of a chance unless it can associate itself underground with certain fungi, which is called a mycorrhizal association, mycorrhizae. And so no tree is an island. And trees, all these trees, you know, we think of lichens. Do people know what lichens are? Lichens are symbiotic relationship between fungi and algae or cyanobacteria. Trees, virtually all trees are like lichens. They're a symbiotic relationship. Yeah, that's a lichen. Those are lichens. All trees are a symbiosis between a plant and a whole bunch of fungi underground. And trees even communicate with each other through those fungi. But that's another story. So I'm gonna put this in a safe place where I can take it back, put it in a bag. So if anybody, as we're walking, has any question about any plant, please shout it out, because I know a lot of you have gardens and a lot of you are probably native plant gardeners, and you might be curious about some of the plants that are growing in your garden that you haven't identified yet or whatever. I might know what it is. So when we first started our restoration program here, there were no tree seedlings or saplings, none. So why would that have been? Deer. Deer in the winter have nothing else to eat but twigs, and they eat the the bark of these twigs is full of nutrients that deer need. They are browsers, not grazers. Grazers eat herbaceous plants. Browsers eat twigs. And in the winter, they got nothing. I mean, they'll eat leaves in the summer, but in the winter, there are no leaves. They just eat twigs. And basically, a tree seedling or a sapling is a big twig. And they eat them right down to the ground all winter. And so we had no trees here, no trees at the Chadwick Preserve, and no tree seedlings and saplings. And so we knew it was deer. So what we think is going on is that this has become really increasingly popular with dog walkers. And the deer, there's something called the ecology of fear. Deer spend less time eating and therefore have less nutrition and have fewer babies when they know there are wolves about. And to deer, dogs are all wolves. They all smell like wolves.
Even by dachshund?
It's ironic that some people, it's wonderful that you care about butterflies, and some people buy butterfly bush, buddleia, and it's pretty. And the ironic thing is that where buddleia has escaped, and it has in some places, and covered vast areas, yeah, the butterflies can get nectar from it, but the butterflies are gone because the caterpillars have to have plants that they can eat in order for the butterflies to exist. And the buddleia wipes out all the plants that the butterfly, our larvae, eat. So it shouldn't be called butterfly bush. It should be called no more butterflies bush. That is Star of Bethlehem.
Okay.
And that is a great example of a non-native that's actually totally benign.
It's all over my backyard.
It doesn't invade the woods and exclude native species. There's just a few of them. But what about this guy with the hanging down flowers? That's Virginia waterleaf, which is a native. This plant here, and don't do what I'm doing. Never do what I do. Walk off trail. This plant here is anise root, which is a native. And if you pull this up and smell the root, it smells just like anise. This is Solomon seal. They're just, I just can never get over marveling at how...
And we planted a lot of these things.
We planted a lot of the things, but a lot of the things, what happened was when we took out the garlic mustard, there was an explosion of native plants that we didn't plant. This is Sanicle. That is Virginia jump seed, or American jump seed.
Should I keep it in my garden?
Well, I selectively weed it out because it can get a little bit dense.
What was this called?
Sanicle.
Good or bad place?
It's native. All you need to know. You know what this is, everybody?
It has the little thorns on little needles on the thing. So
it's called wood nettle.
Yeah.
And there's 2 or 3 species of nettle. Well, no, there's like 5 or 10 species of nettle around here, but only 2 of them sting. And this is one of them, so don't touch it.
Stinging.
And do you know that it injects through those tiny little hypodermic needles, of which it has millions, it injects the same thing that bees inject into you? So it's like getting 100 little bee stings.
This stuff.
That is cleavers. That is not native. This is also called bedstraw. It's one of the species of bedstraw. We have maybe 20 species of bedstraw in Pennsylvania. This is one of the non-native.
Is that the sticky stuff?
It's called sticky willy because if you
I found some in my garden.
See it?
Yeah.
It was sticking to my fingers. And this is what happens to your arm when you stupidly wear a short sleeve shirt and you're pulling garlic mustard amongst this. But feel it. If you looked at that under a microscope, the stem is square in cross section, and all the corners, the 4 corners, have little barbs that point down. It's it's actually pretty.
Is that one considered problematic?
I've been noticing that it's getting a little problematic in places. We were just pulling garlic mustard this morning up the hill, and there was tons of it, as you can see. My left arm didn't get any. Oh, Jacob's Ladder, right. Really. Jacob's Ladder is a spring ephemeral. So a lot of the natives are spring ephemerals, which means that they come up before everything else.
Yeah.
What about an invasive ephemeral like Lesser Celandine?
That is, Lesser Celandine is the worst invasive. What it does, it's a spring ephemeral. It comes up in February and March. And then this time of the year, see it's turning yellow? It is packing nutrients into these little potatoes underground. And that's, most of the year, it exists only as those things. They look like potatoes. And if you dig in your yard, and it's all very shallow, rooted. And if you scrape with a flat shovel, you'll see bright white circles, and that's the inside of these potatoes.
Are they edible?
Not that I know of. And I doubt it. This is in the buttercup family, which is famous for being really bitter. A lot of people think that this tall lavender or white flower is phlox. And there is a phlox that looks kind of like that and is almost that size, but it doesn't start flowering until July. That's called summer phlox. All the other phloxes are spring flowering. Summer phlox is the only one that flowers in the summer. This flowers in the spring, and it's non-native. It's called Dame's Rocket. Rocket is an old English word that means mustard, basically. So if you go to Europe, there's rocket is on the menu. I'm not even sure exactly what it is. Arugula. It could be. Is that what you, yeah. Right. And Dame's Rocket is not native. Oh, the other thing is that mustard, anything in the mustard family, which is also the cabbage family, always has 4-petaled flowers. Count them. 4. Phlox has 5 petals. Most plant families have 5 petals. I meant to mention that the I don't see any right here. The cleavers, the bedstraw, is in the coffee family. It doesn't look anything like coffee, but it has 4 petals also. The whole
Where
coffee
is that
family.
flowering plant native to?
This one?
Is that native?
I think it's Europe. Yeah.
There's a ton of it up in the high trail.
I know. I was about to say that I have always regarded Dame's Rocket as non-invasive until I saw the right here in our Saul Preserve. Lots of other people have found it too, like an acre of it, all in one spot, and it's quite beautiful. So it certainly qualifies as invasive, but you know it's got a redeeming quality too. We'll start pulling it if it gets too abundant. And by too abundant, I mean killing off all the natives. That purple flower right there is Virginia spiderwort, Tradescantia virginiana. One interesting thing about spiderwort is that nuclear power plant protesters in England would plant that around the nuclear power plants because supposedly the female part of the flower turns pink when it gets radiation. I don't know whether that's true or not. That there is going to be bee balm. It already is bee balm, but it's going to have bright red flowers. This thing right here, one of the Monardas. This
for sale at the plant sale.
Do you know what that is? Was it bee balm for sale?
Yep.
Some maple looking leaves. I'll give you a clue. It's a little bit fuzzy stem. Here's some leaves here. This is not what you might think unless you know it. This is purple flowering raspberry. It's got a beautiful big purple flower. And it's got a nice red berry that tastes good.
And it's native?
And it's native. Andy Saul planted this. Look, we have trilliums here.
Wow.
Trilliums are super sensitive to deer browsing, deer grazing. Deer think that trilliums are candy. And we've planted those, and they still are persistent, which indicates to me that our...
The only thing they don't eat in my garden.
Oh, really? How about that? You're lucky. And do you know about this? This is mayapple. And you can see the apple is developing. It'll get about this big around. And they had big white flowers just very, very recently. That's a native. There's just so many things here. It's just incredible how nature, you know, responded to what we did about the plant. Oh, this is zigzag goldenrod, which is one of the forest goldenrods. It doesn't take over big fields like the tall goldenrods that you see out in fields. It's just a little plant that lives in the woods and behaves itself. This plant right here, and I'm going to sacrifice part of it and hand it around, take a leaf and crush it and smell it. It's called Spicebush. And the reason we have a pretty good understory in this woods is because it's the last thing deer eat. They don't like the taste of that. I've heard people, I've had students tell me they thought it smelled like lemon pledge. Do they still make lemon pledge?
Yes. It smells good. Swallowtails.
Spicebush swallowtails. That's why you see Spicebush swallowtails around here. It's one of the most common butterflies. Right. Those are those big black ones with the tails, and sometimes they're yellow. And they also eat sassafras. This and sassafras are the only two members of the true laurel family that live in the temperate zone in North America. The rest of them are all tropical. You go to the tropics and there's 800 species, and here we have 2. Here's a plant species that we planted back in the day. This is one of them. I'm gonna weed around. This is a foam flower. I guess the flowers look like
foam.
What an improbable place for
I know, isn't that great? Beautiful. This looks to me like, yeah, this is arrowwood. This is so cool.
This is a good one, huh?
This was almost gone from this nature preserve because of the deer. This is southern arrowwood, which is called that because Native Americans made arrows out of its wood. It gets like this tall, and then you can harvest the arrows. It's a viburnum. You see it has a particularly beautiful leaf. I love the veination in this leaf.
You think it's going to bloom?
This one's too young to bloom, or it would already have flowering heads, but recently. This is black elderberry, and it gets to be 15 feet tall, and it's covered with thousands and thousands and thousands of berries that are about the size of a BB, and black, and really good. You know, Norway Maple is one of the most invasive of all the tree species that are non-native. And I have completely eradicated it from my property, and I highly recommend that for anybody. Of course, some of them are big and beautiful and valuable for shade. But if you live near the woods, Norway maple seeds blow into the woods. They can grow up in shade, and as adults, they cast so much shade. It's darker under a Norway maple than it is under any other kind of deciduous tree. It is so dark that it wipes out all life on the forest floor. I used to take my students, I've taught at Swarthmore for a while, and I'd take my students into the Crum Woods where there's a major Norway maple problem. And we'd go through woods that kind of look like this. Nice understory, plants on the ground, etc. And we'd come to this big area with absolutely nothing growing on the ground layer. Nothing. And I'd quiz my students and ask them what they thought happened here, and they would come up with things like radioactive waste dump, etc. It was because the canopy was all Norway maple.
How can you tell?
Don't plant them. They should be illegal to sell. And they are in some states, I think, I hope.
How can you tell? Like, is that a Norway Maple?
No, we have, the whole point of my diatribe is that we have eradicated Norway Maple from the Saul Preserve. I'm pretty sure there are none left. Took us years and a maniac with a chainsaw. I just noticed this. That is awesome over there. The the native azalea, I guess, or is it mountain laurel? It doesn't look dark enough leaf to have be mountain laurel. There is a native azalea, and it's growing on the cliff where the deer can't get it. There are a bunch of native azaleas, but that's the one that you see most often. It's sometimes called pinkster flower. It is beautiful. I hope we get that here. There's none in the Saul Preserve yet. That's a phenomenon that you see a lot in Pennsylvania and other states where deer are super abundant, is cliff sides and huge boulders with straight up and down sides will have the last remaining stand of native species in the whole woods. And sometimes I call them rock gardens. That's what they are. One plant that's almost gone from northern Pennsylvania, it used to be the dominant understory species, is called hobblebush. It's a viburnum and has circular leaves about this big, bright red berries, beautiful plant. This is gone. Deer love it. It's gone. But you see it occasionally in a crack in a boulder or somewhere deer can't get. So, a couple things I wanted to point out here. One is, here's a species that we reintroduced. It's creeping phlox, which is a spring blooming phlox. Beautiful plant. So nice. One of our volunteers planted this. All the planting here was volunteer. Here's a cool thing. I wish we could see a grown-up one. This is a seedling wild geranium, which has big lavender-colored flowers. And that's a native, of course. In the old days, by that I mean the last 10 million years, right up until 300 years ago. These streams were all free-flowing, and we had spring runs of shad and alewife and eels and all these fish that spend time in the ocean and come up the streams, and a lot of them were blocked by all these mill dams that they built. And by taking out the dams, we're restoring habitat for those creatures. Yeah, Native Americans, the Lenape people, every spring, they would live off of fish.
And shad runs.
Shad runs, yeah. Exactly. These are the fruits of sweet gum. And where is the sweet gum that I can point out? Sometimes they're mislabeled. Yeah, here's one right here. They have maple-like leaves, and some people call them star maple because it's a little starrier than a maple leaf. But they're not maples. They're not related to maples. They're nowhere near maples. And maples have opposite leaves. Everyone know what opposite and alternate means? Opposite leaves are in pairs along the stem or along a twig, and alternate leaves are not. And these are alternate, and all maples are opposite leaves, so you can always tell. And these fruits are nothing like maple fruits. Little seeds come out of these little holes throughout this fruit, and if you spend a lot of time in your bare feet and have one of these around, you know how they feel. What?
Are they native?
They are native. This is exactly the limit of their range. They're not upstream. In the old days, before European descendants started moving plants around, the range of sweet gum was in the floodplain, or in the coastal plain from here to the ocean. And it stopped right here. This is the fall line where the Piedmont meets the coastal plain. And for some reason, this never climbed up the Piedmont. Well, it didn't recently, actually. Many hundreds of thousands of years ago, it was found, because fossil record shows that it was found farther inland. Now it's moving inland because people like to plant it. It's got beautiful fall color. It's amazing fall color. I bought 3 ostrich ferns.
Yeah.
You can tell ostrich fern from the other ferns for one thing. It's one of the few ferns that narrows where the frond is widest almost to the top, and it narrows gradually down to the base with shorter and shorter frondlets. And I've seen ostrich fern this tall. This is not the ideal habitat, but it's perfectly happy here. And some people would say a little too happy. This is an interesting plant. It'll get about this tall. This is wild lettuce. It's in the same genus as the lettuce we eat, but it's native and it's wild and it gets this tall. So I just wanted to bring everyone here to look at to look in amazement at this thing.
Oh, that's true.
This is such a special tree that it has its own name. It's on the map. It's in fact, this trail is provisionally named after it. This is the wolf tree. You know what wolf tree is a generic term. This is our only wolf tree, so it's the wolf tree. But wolf trees are trees that in the forest that obviously were there before the rest of the forest was there. Because look at all the other trees of the same species around. They're not built like this. This is the kind of architecture that a tree gets when it's all by itself in the middle of a field. And so when a forest grows up around it, it becomes known as a wolf tree.
Is that because it's a lone wolf?
It's a lone wolf.
How old do you think it is?
Well, it is a, what kind of tree?
It is a tulip tree.
Tulip poplar?
Tulip trees, I don't call them poplars because they're not.
They're not. Oh.
Tulip trees are a member of one of the oldest lineages of flowering plants, the magnolias. In fact, it's very closely related to magnolias. And it's called a tulip tree because its flowers are big, beautiful, orange, yellow, and green tulip-shaped flowers, which you never see because they're always about 100 feet up.
And its leaves look a little like tulips?
You could say that. It's got unique leaves. They have a notch at the end, which very few leaves do.
And when does it blossom?
Now. Yep. And sometimes, like, I don't know, a squirrel will chew off a twig and it'll drop to the ground and you get to see the flowers. Right? This is basswood, which is in the same genus as the linden trees of Europe. And you can see linden trees have the same shaped leaf, but they're much, much smaller. Some of the Iroquois tribes used to, you've probably seen, they have masks that are really scary looking, and they usually have hair. Those masks had to be carved from the trunk of a live basswood tree and extracted from the tree while the tree was still alive in order for them to have the power that they were thought to have had. Interestingly, in the winter, if you find one in the winter, the little leaf buds, which look like little cones, sort of, you can pop them in your mouth and they taste like chocolate. Yeah. And here's a bigger basswood. The thing about basswood bark that's unique amongst all the barks is that they look like tire treads. Don't they?
Yeah.
I think so. This is an awesome plant. I love this plant. I have tons of it in my garden.
Do you?
It's evergreen. The overwintering leaves are about this size and about that height, and they stay green all winter.
Wow.
And it's a ground cover. You plant one plant, and in 5 years you'll have, what's it called?
And what's it called again?
Golden ragwort.
Golden ragwort. Packera, right?
Packera aurea.
In that back in that back corner.